I must say I am grateful that I made it to work today, that the vehicle that I was heading to work in didn't break down on my way to work. I imagine also that our Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, is also grateful that the vehicle that he was travelling to Southeast Asia in didn't break down on the way there. That would have been embarrassing. And, of course, has happened recently. Joining us on the program now, political commentator Dr. Bryce Edwards. Bryce, kia ora, good morning.
Morena, Andrew.
I arrived safely. The destinations, of course, Singapore, Thailand and the Philippines. What's to be achieved apart from air miles and supporting the airline industry, perhaps? What's to be achieved by this trip, Bryce?
Look, yes, it's the parliamentary recess at the moment, so he's not required in Parliament. So the Prime Minister, I think, is quite rightly using this time to get out of the country after the pandemic. We really had 3 years of the government not travelling, the Prime Minister just being at home. So Luxon and his government are determined to get out there and press the flesh, try to integrate New Zealand again. Luxon sold himself at the election campaign as really wanting to boost trade and being a government that gets New Zealand connected, with the world. And so he's doing that. Yep. He's made a number of trips already. And this Southeast Asia, where he is at the moment, is a crucial area for New Zealand. So he's been in Singapore, where New Zealand's traditionally had a very strong relationship with Singapore. He's now in Thailand this week, and then he's next in the Philippines, as you said. And so I think mostly it's about connecting with the world and increasing those trade opportunities and, trying to attract investment to New Zealand. So it's mostly about economics, but you can't escape those big geopolitical issues of especially what's happening in the Middle East,
Yep.
The sort of realignments that are occurring with I guess, what we talk about with AUKUS, yep. Defence alliances between the US and some other English-speaking countries. And so those sort of conversations have been happening, especially in Singapore, because we already have New Zealand has quite a strong defence alliance or relationship with that government.
And to be
so money and guns.
Yeah, money and guns. And it's not just brass bands and photo opportunities. There are actual deals being done. There's contracts being signed. We might see Singapore drones in New Zealand in active manoeuvres. That's one of the theories I've heard.
Yeah, drones are the big advances at the moment in military technology, and so lots of countries are exploring and developing these things. Singapore's one of those, and there was some discussion about that, and New Zealand, wanted to encourage that. I think it probably got more headlines than it captured people's imagination about all these drones coming across New Zealand. But I think it just speaks to Luxon's attempt to be nice to Singapore and say, hey, come and work with us.
Exactly. And to be fair, whilst Jacinda Ardern was the international darling and got a lot of press whenever she travelled overseas, particularly for the leadership of Singapore, Thailand and Philippines, kind of kindred spirits in some ways. They've also got that kind of CEO vibe, the leadership of those countries.
They have. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, Andrew, but it looks like Luxon's been well received in these places. Some of these countries are small countries like Singapore, and we have lots of issues in common. And you're right. Luxon doesn't kind of have the star power and maybe charisma that Ardern had, but I think his CEO vibes are probably quite effective in those three nations. So, by all accounts, he's doing a good job. Nothing particularly interesting to come out of it, but he's doing what this country or what this government really does need to do is just reconnect at the moment.
Meanwhile, of course, back here in New Zealand, there's all sorts of talk about cutting costs so that policies can be afforded, and not only cutting costs but cutting red tape. The Resource Management Act. Now, this again was an election promise. Things are going to be made much easier, from the RMA to the FTA. I'm not sure anybody else apart from me is calling it this, Bryce, but those are the initials, and this will be the replacement legislation for what currently is the RMA, at least do some corner cutting for that legislation.
Yes, so the FastTrack Act is what we're discussing at the moment. And it's a very contentious piece of legislation. The RMA has been argued about for decades, and I think there's agreement across the political spectrum that the RMA does need upgrading, replacing, or modification. I don't know,
Yep.
but it's not ideal, and there's always this tension between the protection of the environment and helping development and getting the balance right. And at the moment, there's a feeling that the RMA is slowing down infrastructure in housing and all sorts of important things that we need to get done.
Yep.
And so this government's saying, right, we're just going to cut the red tape. In fact, they talk about cutting the green tape as well, i.e.
Yep.
environmental red tape or protections. And so they've designed this new piece of legislation, which isn't exactly a replacement for the RMA, but it's to sit alongside it and basically bypass the RMA.
Yeah.
So the RMA will stay there, but it will specify certain projects that can be fast-tracked and don't need to get all the consents that they normally have and all the hoops they need to jump through. And so I think there's some agreement across the political spectrum that maybe something like this is needed, that, there are sometimes projects that just need, if there's political agreement, that they can be green lighted and said, and go ahead with them. The problem is that this is being done on quite a big scale, and there's a bit of alarm from opposition politicians, environmental movement, actually a lot of people saying that this is really supercharging this process, and it's politicizing it, and it means that we're going to have 3 ministers in the government that get to decide whether the Resource Management Act gets bypassed by particular projects. And so the government has already sent out invitations to 200 organizations saying, you're welcome to apply. And this bill is going to be passed soon, and we will have the magic ability to just say, yes, you can develop this dam, you can build this bridge, you can build these apartments, and you won't be held up by red tape. And so coal mines, I think, are one of the big sort of, I don't know, bogeymen, or the ones that the environmental movement are quite worried about, that there's been a lot of seabed applications, coal mining, that have failed to get resource management consent. They've failed in the courts, but now they can just go to the ministers and say, hey, we failed, but can you give us an exemption and just let us do it? And so that might well happen.
The shortcuts not only in terms of the impact on the environment, but the impact in political process. Having a situation where saying, instead of having experts look at this, we're just going to get 3 elected officials to rubber stamp this one. That's not exactly robust supervision, I suppose.
Yeah, some people are talking about it with the term Muldoonist.
Yes, I was thinking think big as you were describing it, actually.
Yeah. Indeed. So Muldoon, I think it was the National Development Act of 1979. He pushed that through, that just sort of said we can do what we want, and we'll build the Clyde Dam, and we don't need to get any expert, or court approval. And so that was seen as a bit draconian, and there were no checks and balances on that. So that's what critics, myself, are sort of saying, that where the checks and balances, what will stop, I guess, lobbyists or companies with deep pockets from just saying, bringing up Shane Jones or whoever the 3 ministers are, and saying, hey, mate, I'm making a donation to you. Can you fast track our whatever? And of course, even if Shane Jones, is, if we trust him and think, oh no, he wouldn't do that, he would follow good process. It doesn't mean that the next government, won't be of less moral fibre, and might therefore also be able to push through all their mates' projects. So
whatever happens, Shane Jones is likely to be part of that triumvirate, but not necessarily giving jobs to people that have made donations to the New Zealand First Party. Of course, that's just mere speculation at this point. Interesting.
Of course.
Interesting. You talked about the Clyde Dam project, because I think we've spent more money trying to shore up the erosion problems within the Cromwell Gorge than we spent on the Clyde Dam, because they didn't do proper engineering investigations as to whether or not that was a good site for the dam. And I mean, examples come to mind, when we think, oh gosh, well, let's move the RMA out of the way and build houses quickly. Leaky homes come to mind, of course, and that's cost this country and continues to cost this country so much. Or, of course, going back to the time when it seemed a good idea to bulldoze sand into swamps and build Christchurch suburbs on them, and, of course, the literal flow-on effects of that. I mean, concerns not just for the greenies, not just for the environment, but this could come back to bite everyday New Zealanders as well.
I think those are all really good points. There's a big appetite for, I think, this government to get things done.
Yep.
And so the public is sort of on board with, let's just build some things, let's get some things. So I don't think the government's going to be, I don't think this is going to be a big unpopular move. Largely when the government just says, look, we just need to get things done, people say yes. But you're right, sometimes too much speed, not enough, experts and proper process can lead to very bad outcomes. So you have to get a balance right. Is this fast track bill going to achieve that? I don't think so. But I do think there's a problem at the moment with a bit too much secrecy in the whole process. We don't know who these projects are who's going to be applying. We don't know, and yet Parliament's going to be passing this legislation, and they're going to be having select committee hearings in the next few weeks, but without any kind of evidence or ideas about what we're talking about. It's very difficult to debate it.
And certainly, if it turns out to be Shane Jones and his mates, or there turns out to be a disproportionate amount of projects approved in the electorates of the people who are involved in the decision making, that's just not a good look at all. So it is a wait and see situation on this one. Bryce, thanks for your insight. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.